Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Wilder School Lunch and Learn series. We're eager to have you join us today for our session entitled 2025 Election Results Implications for Virginia and the Nation with our featured speaker, Dr. Bob Holsworth, and our moderator, Dr. Robyn McDougle. Thank you for joining us. This free monthly virtual event focuses on discussing relevant topics and connecting you with key leaders in our community. None more relevant than today's topic. I am Stephen Dozier. I'm the Senior Director of Development here at the Wilder School. And before we get started, I've got a few exciting updates for you. First and foremost, are you or someone you know interested in pursuing a degree at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs? We recommend that you apply now for our spring and summer 2026. Application deadlines are coming up. Scan the QR code for more information. Mark your calendars now for the Wilder School Fall 2025 commencement on Saturday, December 13th from 1:30 to 3 at the Greater Richmond Convention Center. And also congratulations to our fall graduates. We're excited to share the newest issue of the Wilder School in Action magazine. Our engaging magazine highlights faculty research, student success, and community impact stories. You can explore the latest edition now digitally. Just follow the link on your screen. You can stay connected beyond today's session with the Wilder School through our YouTube channel. You'll find recordings of our past lunch and learns, most, if not all, of our events, faculty spotlights, and new content each month. It only takes a moment to like and subscribe. There's always something happening at the Wilder School, so don't forget to look at the links in the chat for more info. And now I'll pass it off to our dean, Dr. Susan Gooden.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited that you're joining us today for, I know, a most engaging lunch and learn with Dr. Holsworth. He's going to be introduced in a few minutes, and I just want to say I'm just thrilled that he is such a great friend of the Wilder School, and we know that his political commentary is respected not only here in Virginia, but nationally and internationally as well. Today's topic, the polls are over, and now we have the actual results. We like being a part at the Wilder School of being part of the polls leading up to the elections, and so want to recognize everyone who's involved in our Wilder School Commonwealth poll. This is a signature poll that's recognized and referenced throughout the election and even the years in between. So still keep on the lookout because we will continue to poll Virginians on policy interests of the day and what their preferences are. And as we gear up for the new General Assembly session that will start in January, we also want to say congratulations to all of our Virginia Capital semester interns. We expect to have 65 of our undergraduate students across the Wilder School and VCU who will be walking the halls of the General Assembly supporting Democratic and Republicans alike in the General Assembly and learning an incredible amount about politics in Virginia, policy making, and serving constituents. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for today, who is behind much of the success at the Wilder School, Dr. Robyn McDougle. She is our Associate Dean for Research and Outreach and also a Professor of Criminal Justice. She also directs our Commonwealth poll. So, Robyn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dean Gooden, and thank you everyone for being here today. This, of course, is clearly one of my most favorite opportunities to be part of in the Wilder School. It really is my honor and privilege to introduce today's speaker and moderate our Lunch and Learn today. Dr. Bob Holsworth is frequently called on and referenced for his insights as a political analyst. He is the managing partner of Decide Smart and the founding director of the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. His comments on Virginia and national politics have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and newspapers throughout the nation. He has appeared on all major U.S. networks and the BBC. And he was named one of the 100 influentials in Virginia politics by Campaigns and Elections magazine. Dr. Holsworth, thank you so much for being here with us today and to provide our audience with your thoughts, your views, and your insights from this most historic election that we had just a couple of weeks ago here in the Commonwealth. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you so that you can kind of give us a lay of the land, if you will, and then, of course, have our audience thinking about all those opportunities to ask questions. Make sure you provide them in the chat so that we have an opportunity for questions after Dr. Holsworth's presentation. Dr. Holsworth, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks so much, Robyn and Dean Gooden. It's great to be back with everyone. And what I want to try to do today is really give a little overview of what happened in the election, talk somewhat about what I think we might see going forward, and then finally talk not only about this redistricting issue that could come up, but also about some of the issues that are impacting higher education as well. So let me just begin with the election. And if we want to try to explain it, I don't think it's a very difficult election to explain. And I would basically focus on three factors that gave us this incredible result where Abigail Spanberger actually wins by a larger margin than any Democratic candidate for governor has in 60 years. And so I think three big factors were involved here. The first, obviously, was the national standing of President Trump. And if you look at this, what you've seen is that since he became president, Donald Trump has been what you might call a downhill racer in terms of his public approval rating. And what we've seen in part is that this is because most folks do not believe that he's focused significantly on the economy. And that secondly, there have been particular groups that have reacted very negatively, not only to his economic policies, but to other things such as deportation. We've seen a reversal of the gains that he'd made with Latino voters, and we've seen with young people, both who are struggling to think about jobs in this economy, and in particularly with young women, we've seen a real decline in Trump's support. And so that was sort of the backdrop to the election on Tuesday everywhere. And so if you looked at what happened, Virginia was not unique. What occurred was that in New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill, the gubernatorial candidate for the Democrats, won by 13.5 points. The Democrats won some key elections in Pennsylvania. For the first time in decades, they won a statewide race in Georgia for public service commissioners. They even picked up seats in Mississippi. And this followed on extraordinary Democratic successes in the special elections that took place in the time period before this election, in the spring and the summer, where the Democrats consistently overperformed. So in some ways, this election was really a response to Donald Trump that we saw nationally, and Virginia joined the party very significantly as well. Secondly, what you saw is that in Virginia, there was even a particular issue that arose because of the national policies, and that was the DOGE cuts, the federal cutbacks, and then ultimately the shutdown. But the federal cutbacks had a huge implication for Northern Virginia, and we saw that come out in the vote where the Northern Virginia vote was both very strong in turnout and very strong in terms of even a higher percentage than normal of people who voted for Democratic candidates. And the reason for this, I think, was that when Trump came into office and he had Elon Musk there, you might recall that they didn't talk about having an efficiency commission or a blue ribbon panel looking at ways to find efficiencies in government. Instead, you had this striking image of Elon Musk with a chainsaw that he was going to take to the federal government. And I think that chainsaw analogy and what happened there was extraordinarily annoying and had a tremendous impact in Northern Virginia and on the Spanberger campaign. in that sense, because she continually said she wanted to respond to what she called the chaos that Trump had brought to Virginia with his policies. So you had both Trump national popularity going down, and in particular in Virginia, which he had never won, I might add. He had lost by 6 points to Kamala Harris just a few months later. And then by the time of the election, the Commonwealth poll and other polls were showing he was double digits underwater, sometimes 12 points, sometimes 14 points, sometimes 15 points. And that was a structural issue that the Republicans never really acknowledged. And you might recall that during the Doge cutbacks, Governor Youngkin, who might have, in an alternate universe, might have said to the Democrats, let's get together and come up with a Virginia plan to respond to this. Instead, defended the cutbacks, defended Elon Musk, said what was happening was simply a rebalancing. And that's not how voters in Northern Virginia felt about that at all. Then thirdly, the third factor in this campaign, and from my perspective, was largely what you might call the candidate quality and the quality of the campaigns. And here I think there was a tremendous discrepancy. That on one hand, with Abigail Spanberger, the Democrats had what you might call a very seasoned campaigner. She had run for 3 congressional elections in very tight, competitive districts. In the first election, she wasn't even the favorite. And so she had been very familiar with what it took to run a campaign in a competitive race, how to raise money, how to mobilize voters, how to do all the things that campaigns had to do. And so we had on the Democratic side, first of all, a very seasoned campaigner. On the Republican side, you had Winsome Earl Sears, who in retrospect had really had very little campaign experience. She had won 1 election for delegate, and after 2 years decided to leave the House, issued a press release saying God had told her that it was time to leave. She ultimately ran for Congress against Bobby Scott, where she lost in a landslide, and then was fortunate to be on the Youngkin ticket as lieutenant governor. And while she did win that campaign, it's hard to say that that campaign was about her. It was really about Glenn Youngkin versus Terry McAuliffe. And I think the rest of the race was more or less a coattails election there. And so on the quality, I think you had to say Spanberger had higher quality as a candidate. And then when you looked at the issues, Spanberger, to her credit, spoke about the issues that people cared about. And in particular, other than talking about Donald Trump and the chaos he had brought to Virginia, she had a very disciplined campaign that simply focused on this whole issue of lowering costs. She said, everywhere I went, people were talking about the cost of living, and I'm going to try to address that when I'm governor, whether that be in energy, housing, or healthcare. Sears, for her part, flailed around for most of the campaign. It was a very odd campaign. Her first campaign manager was a pastor without any political experience. She then had to fire in September. And for a while, the campaign spoke about being the sort of running on the Youngkin record. Then for a while, it spoke about the car tax. But the reality was that most of the campaign and most of the ads until the last week of the campaign, the majority of the ads were about anti-trans issues, trans kids in girls' bathrooms or trans kids playing sports. And while her position on trans kids playing girls' sports might have been a popular position with the public, when you looked at the issues that the people cared about, this was really low on the list. With far higher were things like the inflation, the rising cost of living, reproductive rights, threats to democracy. And so at the end of the day, what you had was a candidate who was at least on the ground, on the territory that people cared about, against a candidate who was talking about issues that people really didn't care about very much. And the fact of the matter there was that I think, at heart, Earl Sears is a culture warrior. That's what she cares about. That's what she likes. One might, with some irony, say she was born that way. And ultimately, that campaign had a set of issues that just didn't gain any traction with the voters whatsoever. And so those three features, I think, were the really deciding factors in what led to this smashing victory by the Democrats and Abigail Spanberger. The rest of the statewide races, on lieutenant governor, you had Ghazala Hashmi versus John Reed. That race was almost over before it began. Hashmi, state senator, probably the most liberal progressive candidate on the ticket. But for most people, she was simply a generic Democrat running for lieutenant governor. John Reed, radio talk show host, conservative talk show host, had his candidacy undermined from the get-go by Governor Youngkin, because Governor Youngkin basically asked him to withdraw and not even accept the nomination, largely because there was concern about pictures that had come out that were relevant to John Reed being an openly gay man. Down the block here on Gray Street, there's a bar called Godfrey's that occasionally, I think, hosts drag queen brunches. And there were pictures of John Reed putting dollar bills in the breasts of drag queens, wearing a T-shirt said he was liberal in the bedroom. The governor found this to be very problematic, asked him to withdraw. He didn't withdraw. And then for about the first month and a half of the campaign, the candidates couldn't even talk together. The other race, which was probably the most interesting race of the three, turned out to be between the incumbent Jason Miyares and Jay Jones, a young former delegate from Hampton Roads, who had been part of a very well-known family in Hampton Roads. His father had been a judge and a well-known legislator as well. And what happened is that I think early on, the Republicans had decided that by September, they knew that Earl Sears wasn't going to win. What they were trying to do was to ensure that Miyares could get reelected as Attorney General. And the reason for that is that in Virginia, the Attorney General has independent authority. They're not part of the executive branch. They are the chief legal officer of the Commonwealth. At the moment, for example, they appoint all the counsels to the universities. They're employees of the AG's office. And perhaps most importantly, the Attorney General is the person who articulates the state's legal position vis-a-vis the policies of the Trump administration in Washington. And that has a lot to do also with what's going to happen with deportation and ICE here in Virginia as well. So the Republicans knew that Miyares was a good candidate. They really liked him. But they had this tricky situation of how do they find a way to get him to win when Sears is going to lose, because the more she lost by, the worse it was going to be for Miyares. And ultimately, they started with a very conventional attack on Jay Jones, saying he was soft on crime. Then they came out with the reckless driving ticket for 116 miles per hour. To this day, I don't know how his Democratic primary opponent didn't find this out, which was then combined with a sweetheart community service deal. And then finally, you had the abhorrent email that he had sent to a Republican delegate, Carrie Coyner, in this sort of odd emails or text that he had sent her, in which he said that he wouldn't mind 2 bullets to the head of the Republican Speaker of the House at that time, and wouldn't mind seeing the young children of the Speaker die in the arms of the mother. A lot of folks thought that was immediately disqualifying, and it obviously hurt Jay Jones, because while Abigail Spanberger got 57% of the vote, he ran far behind. But the reality on this front was that Spanberger won by so much that Jones was able to be there. Now, some of the exit polling on this was quite interesting. If people felt that the text messages were disqualifying, 90% of those voters, that you might imagine, voted for Jason Miyares. However, if they felt they were concerning but not disqualifying, and then there were people who didn't think they were relevant, But this group in the middle who felt that they were concerning but not disqualifying, most of those people must have been Democrats who voted for Jay Jones because he got about 75 to 80% of those voters. And at the end of the day, what happened is that Jones made that argument successfully enough that this election wasn't really about him or Jason Miyares. It was about what position the Virginia ought to take in response to the Trump administration. And he said, while Jason Miyares refused to join any of the suits brought by Democratic attorney generals against the Trump administration, he would see President Trump in court. At the end of the race, the only candidate that President Trump endorsed on the Republican ticket was Jason Miyares, and I don't think that was helpful. You might recall that there was only one person who used Trump's endorsement as an ad in that race, and it was Jay Jones. That Jason Miyares never touted that endorsement, and in fact, he asked for Spanberger votes to support him because he knew that Earl Sears was running behind. So at the end of the day, Jay Jones won. I think the surprising factor was the margin. He won by about 6 points. And I think the reason for that is that Abigail Spanberger won by a margin that was beyond what most polls had judged a couple of weeks earlier when they were doing the polling. So that's where we were on the statewide races. Turning to the House races, this was really dramatic. The Democrats targeted 13 Republican seats, and they won every one of them. And the leader of the Democrats has to be given an enormous amount of credit for this. This is the Speaker, Don Scott, who's had one of the most remarkable rises that I've ever seen in American politics. He spent 9 years in jail on a drug charge. He had his rights restored by Governor Bob McDougle a little after 2010. He then passed the bar exam. 4 years later, he was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates from Portsmouth. And then he orchestrated a coup 4 years after that against the leader of the Democratic Party in the House and ultimately became the Speaker. And in this election, raised far more money than we have ever seen in House of Delegates races in Virginia, where the Democrats wound up outspending the Republicans 3 and 4 to 1 in most of the races. And at the end of the day, you might say that Scott pitched a perfect game. And what was stunning about this is the Democrats won in places that weren't easy to win. That almost all of these competitive races took place in places where maybe Harris had carried by a point or 2 or 3, but for the most part, the Republicans also did typically very, very well in off-year elections. And the Democrats were able to develop a ground game that was extraordinary, and in ways that were surprising to me in a couple of places. I'll mention one, which was outside of Virginia Tech. The Democrats were able to successfully defeat Chris Obenshain with Lily Franklin. And what was fascinating to me about this is that Franklin really focused on mobilizing Tech students. But I thought that might not be so successful because Tech also had a Charlie Kirk Memorial from Turning Point USA that drew thousands of students to this memorial. And I thought the Republicans would be able to use that to counter what the Democrats were doing in Blacksburg. But they didn't. And ultimately, Lily Franklin registered tons of Tech students. They did very well on same-day registration at Tech, and she was able to win relatively handily in that race. And so all over Virginia, you saw the Democrats win, and they won in these places where they were truly competitive races. They won 2 big races in Chesterfield. They won a race that was centered in Petersburg, but also had Dinwiddie County and Prince George County. Really remarkable. And then one other point I want to simply make about the House of Delegates now is the tremendous demographic change that has occurred there. that in the House of Delegates right now, among the Democratic delegation, about 60% are women, and over about a little less than 40% are African American. And this is pretty remarkable. At the governor's level, we had two women running. We had the first women governor, and nobody really even talked about that in the campaign. But what we've now seen in the House of Delegates is African American candidates winning in places they had never won before. We have African American delegates in Stafford County, Spotsylvania County. You have African American delegates in Fredericksburg, in Spotsylvania. You have African American delegate Leslie Maida winning in Chesterfield. That you've seen this is really broadening, not only in numbers, but in geography of African American representation in the House. So that's where we are there. Now, what comes next? Abigail Spanberger has a very clear sense of what she wants to do. She says she wants to lower costs in housing, energy, and in healthcare. And let me just tell you, that is going to be challenging on every single count. That in her campaign, she was able to, in some ways, promote this idea. Winsome Sears, for some odd reason, never contested in a serious way, Spanberger's ideas for lowering costs. She didn't ask, how quickly are you going to be able to lower costs? What's going to be done? Because Spanberger's ideas, in some instances, may take some time. They're very different than what you might have seen in New York with Zohran Mamdani, just saying, well, we'll have free buses. Spanberger didn't have that kind of thing. Energy in Virginia is going to be this continuing issue going forward, largely because we don't have enough power internally to power all of the data centers and all of the growth that we're seeing in the data centers that are coming around. And that's going to be a continuing challenge. Some people say we have enough now, but we may not have enough later. But the reality is that how do we go forward? And the big question, I think, is does Virginia go forward with more fossil fuel plants, particularly natural gas plants, or do we try to capture this with renewables? And whether or not the legislature revisits the Virginia Clean Economy Act that they passed long before data centers became this growing reality in Virginia economy. On healthcare, Spanberger says she wants to deal with pharmacy benefit managers. These are often seen as the middleman between the physicians in the hospitals and the and the drug companies, but they also encompass they also typically own the drugstores as well. It'll be interesting to see if she can make much progress there. Lowering the cost of housing is going to be very, very difficult because that's a supply issue, and in many instances, that's a local zoning issue, and how you deal with that is going to be another challenge that they have. I just might go back for a minute on energy. If you're going to have big, large solar facilities, local governments typically don't like them, and there's going to be a question about whether the state government is going to mandate that certain kind of solar facilities have to be approved by local governments there. That's, I think, a big challenge. What you're going to see from the legislature, I think, is that they're going to bring up a whole set of bills that Glenn Youngkin vetoed over his last 2 years, where he had veto pen out for hundreds of bills. So immediately you're going to see bills that pass for minimum wage increases, for paid family and medical leave. That's going to go there for rejoining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I think that's going to pass as well. And so what the legislature has is they have on their menu, you might say, all the bills that Glenn Youngkin vetoed, and many of them are going to immediately arise in this session as well. Now, some other comments here. The first is on this redistricting. The Democrats in Virginia said that they would like that if other states go forward, particularly Republican states with redistricting plans, they want to put a referendum on the ballot that would change Virginia's redistricting for congressional elections for the next two sets of congressional elections. A few years ago, we had a referendum that established this quote unquote bipartisan commission on redistricting that supposedly citizens were going to come over and agree on a plan. They didn't agree on one. The Supreme Court eventually Virginia did the redistricting, but now the Virginia Democrats are saying we can create two or three more Democratic seats if we do a midterm redistricting like they've done in Texas or like they are likely to do in Missouri and some other Republican states. What is interesting about that to me is if that occurs, that referendum has to take place in April. It'll be a 3-month battle. And in some ways, it'll deflect attention from Abigail Spanberger's agenda in the General Assembly, because that redistricting battle will bring in all kinds of national money. So much will be at stake for both the national Republicans and the national Democrats that Virginia will become, sort of ground zero for the debate over redistricting. And that referendum will be extraordinarily expensive, even more expensive, I think, than we've seen in some of those House races for sure combined there, because it'll be a national referendum that we might have. We may not have it. The courts could, I think, put an end to it if all of a sudden the appeal courts do not reverse the decision made the other day about the Texas redistricting. That might not happen, but if it does, it's going to really add another feature to where we are here in Virginia. Finally, I want to talk just a little bit about higher education, the battle going on at UVA and other universities, largely because we're in a university setting here. What we've seen here is that at the University of Virginia, there was a clear effort to remove the president of the university, Jim Ryan, in the spring and in the summer, early summer. Ryan was a very popular president among the students. I think he probably the most popular president in Virginia among the student body there. He was generally perceived in the legislature, particularly by the Democrats, as being a good and effective president who they supported very, very strongly. At the same time, there was this sort of united effort between a conservative activist group called the Jefferson Council, who didn't like his DEI policies, Glenn Youngkin, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the state government on the Republican side didn't like the DEI policies. And with the Trump administration coming into office, they had at the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice 2 former UVA law grads who were very uncomfortable and critical of Ryan and particularly the DEI policies. And so what happened was that there was this concerted effort in some ways to remove Ryan from the presidency of UVA over DEI. And if you look at the Youngkin governorship, what you see is that in many ways, because the Democrats controlled the legislature, he didn't have the opportunity to have many legislative accomplishments. It's very, very thin in terms of a legacy or a record in the legislature. And what I think was his distinctive accomplishment in some ways, you may like it or you may not, was that he wanted to bring the universities to heel on diversity, equity, and inclusion and get them to move away from that. And when Donald Trump got reelected, that effort became intensified on this front. And so what happened is that all of a sudden there were all these federal investigations of University of Virginia along the lines that you had seen with Columbia and Harvard and other places. And Jim Ryan was told by both the board members that the Civil Rights Division said that they would not settle these investigations unless he resigned. The governor apparently told a board member of UVA that Ryan must resign, and that was conveyed to Ryan. And against his own will, he decided that if he was going to try to save UVA from having, for being what he was told they were going to do, which was to bleed it white, he would resign. That infuriated the Democrats in the legislature that this was happening to a popular president. The second point of this was that the second effort on the part of the Youngkin administration then and the UVA board, who had been appointed by Youngkin, was to immediately begin a presidential search and try to ensure that Jim Ryan was not try to ensure that they would have a successor to Jim Ryan in place before Abigail Spanberger became governor. And now, after this election, Spanberger writes a letter to the UVA board saying, "Stop, delay this. This is going to be crazy. You can't do this with your board because a lot of those board members are going to be replaced right away. You can't bring somebody on." And this has provoked an intense controversy between the governor and Spanberger. My sense is that Spanberger will win this, that I don't know how anyone could take this position with a governor that's leaving, with an incoming governor that is saying, "Stop the search," and at the end of the day, with board members that the legislature refuses to confirm. And so my sense is that ultimately Spanberger will win this. There's similar issues that are taking place at GMU with with Gregory Washington, who is now under not only federal investigation, but Jim Jordan has put a criminal referral in for his DEI positions on that front. So that's really going on right now, and it's really a dramatic thing. Finally, I would just say what's different here is that at VCU, unlike in some ways UVA and unlike GMU, VCU capitulated early to the issue, and by and large removed all of its DEI things, and beyond that, in some ways, then called in a law firm. Said, "We're not just going to eliminate our DEI office, but we're going to try to exterminate any point of DEI that we have." And I would just say personally, I find that very troubling. That I always thought that VCU, like George Mason, was formed to really, serve the diverse and inclusive communities in Virginia. That has been our calling card for 50 years. And I wish that, I consider Gregory Washington up at GMU kind of a hero for refusing to apologize for his promotion of DEI. And I hope that Abigail Spanberger, if she's here, appoints some board members that will change things. We now have one board member, I won't mention her name, who largely posts things on Twitter saying that DEI is a monster. She has said that Abigail Spanberger knows how to lie because she was trained as a CIA spy. And my sense is that VCU is losing a little bit of its identity. And I would hope that there would be greater pushback, not only from new members of the board, but from the faculty as well. So, Robyn, that's where I'm at. And I'd love to take any questions.
Dr. Holsworth, thank you so much. That was an outstanding, as always, overview of every level of the impact of the Virginia election process just a couple of weeks ago. I do have a couple of questions for you, and then I am going to turn it over to these many questions that we've already gathered from our audience, and I'm sure we'll gather some more. So my first question for you is, and we've talked about, which I think you make some great points about what drove the election results, especially at the top of the ticket and the historic vote count for Governor-elect Spanberger around the negative views of Trump and his low approval rating, Northern Virginia and DOJ, and of course, candidate quality and campaign quality. But we did also have very uniquely one of the most diverse sets of tickets across the board, Republican and Democrat at the statewide level, from racial, geographic, ideological views. How do you interpret the impact of the diversity on voter agreement and party strategy? And really, what I want, because Dr. Holsworth, you always have your pulse on the views around how people think. Is it really a reflecting of a true broadening of the political coalitions of Democrats and Republicans? Or did we see some really impressive coalition management by various campaigns in this past election cycle?
Yeah, well, I think the Democrats did a far better job of managing these coalitions, and the Republicans had more of a challenge there. Um, certainly, as we said, neither of the gubernatorial candidates emphasized gender and their historic potential very much at all. And beyond that, nobody really talked about it. Sometimes the candidates don't talk about it, but other people talk about it. They really didn't in any ways. Um, I think the issue of the Republicans is that you had this openly gay person who was opposed by the governor, and then you had the bizarre performance by Winston Earl Sears in the debate, right, which was just generally bizarre. Like in my Substack, I did a piece on it. I called it "I Am Interrupting," on that to take off on her "I Am Speaking" meme. And then during the time, Abigail Spanberger says, "Well, you would discriminate against gay people. You would say they couldn't have jobs," and she turns around and says, "That's not discrimination." Just interrupts to say that. So it's hard to say that here is a candidate who is, bringing that together as well. The other thing that's happened, I think, too, is where the Republicans had done very well, I think nationally and in Virginia, in bringing in Latino voters in a way that surprised the Democrats in 2024, that they did so well, and particularly among young Latino males. And then what has happened, I believe, is that when Trump started his deportation policy, if he had stopped at border security, it'd be very positive. People were very happy with that. But now that they're seeing what's actually happening in the deportation, it is really reducing the Republican coalition there tremendously, because now all of a sudden you're seeing what he said was that he was going to get rid of internally the worst of the worst. And now you see these people who are just getting arrested on the street, children, kids, all over. You have Joe Rogan saying this is insane. This is not what I thought was happening. And you have all kinds, and Trump has so far doubled down on it, brought it to Charlotte. And my guess is going to bring it to Virginia now. Now that we have a Democratic governor, we're probably going to see it. We've had a lot of arrests, but we're going to see it more visibly, in all likelihood. Very unpopular, and it's harming the Republicans in the Latino community. So here's something that you would think they would want to build upon. Jason Miyares talks about it quite a bit, but because of Trump policies, it's really terrible to, it hasn't worked at all. So my sense is that the Republicans had a lot of diversity, but more than anything, they ran away from it.
Yeah.
And I think
that's a really great point,
them.
Dr. Holsworth. Yeah, it's a great point. Well, kind of along that same kind of vein in a bit is around one of the questions from our audience around independent voters. And it's clearly something we've talked a lot about in the Commonwealth poll, the growing number of independent voters, individuals who, aren't picking always based on party, they're picking based on issues and candidates. And so, did you see in your view, with regards to this election, were we seeing a increase or a movement of independent voters to Governor-elect Spanberger and Democrat candidates in the House of Delegates? Or do you think it was that they did a better job of turning out their base? So the question really becomes, are we swaying independent voters politically to one side consistently? Or is it still in Virginia about getting out your base in full force?
I think it's a little of both. Okay, so the Democrats did a better job of getting out their base. If you take a look at the city of Richmond compared to 2021, then you look in Southwest Virginia where the Republicans are, the enthusiasm was more on the Democratic side. So that was there. Among the independent voters, the question is like, well, who's really independent?
Right. And
So
when
that,
and
you know, in
where?
a lot of the polls, people press them to say, you know, which way you lean, which way you don't. And so what I would say there is that you have a lot of young people who consider themselves independent. And in fact, the Democratic brand is so bad with Democrats that there are a lot of young people who probably lean Democratic but don't consider themselves a Democrat because they don't want to identify with Chuck Schumer and the crowd in Washington on that front. So that's not where they are. In this race, certainly Democrats had a huge advantage ultimately among independent voters, and the fact that they broke that way at the end, I think, was something that contributed to Spanberger's margin of victory as well. That she not only won Democrats, but she also won independents as well. Carried Hashmi along that way.
Yeah.
And Jones won enough there to be there. But Jones was really, what most of the polls had been showing was that that if Spanberger won, 54-46, that Jones race was really close because it was like an 8-point differential there. But when she won 57-42, Jones, is able to win.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, elect Attorney General Jones. So we had a question from our audience. What do you think, based on your opinion, Dr. Holsworth, particularly the sweep in the House, but particularly in the 82nd and 75th districts? So the question is, how much did Carrie Coyner's involvement in the J. Jones text issue hurt her reelection chances? And is that what ended up causing that potential Democrat swing in that House seat?
And that's a fascinating question that I don't absolutely know the answer to, but I'll give you some hints on that. It was very clear once Coyner got involved that way that the Democratic leadership was furious at this, because they felt it was effective on that front. And you saw the Speaker of the House, Don Scott, make 2 commercials for Carrie Coyner and come to church for Lindsay Doherty. And in particular, the concern among Democrats had been in that district that actually tilts Democratic in presidential elections, that there wasn't large African American turnout in off-year elections. And so if you saw one of Don Scott's ads, comes out and says, "Hi, I'm Don Scott, the first African American Speaker of the House." Very clear about this. Carrie Coyner didn't respond very effectively when he came to church. Said she felt intimidated, which I thought, like, this is like crazy. The Speaker of the House goes to work for somebody and you say you're intimidated that he came to your district there. So that wasn't very helpful. And again, it was a campaign the Democrats organized very, very well. I mean, their ground game was superior. They got the vote out. They had Coyner was the one Republican who wasn't totally outspent.
Right.
She had a lot of money. I think Lindsay Doherty spent more than her at the end of the day, but Coyner had more than enough to be fully competitive. That race wasn't very, very close. One of sort of the hidden things, like what in the world was that relationship between Jones and Coyner that he was writing this stuff to her,
right. There were a lot of questions around how that comes about.
Just write this stuff. And and Louise Lucas, of course, in her inimitable style after the campaign, has this tweet that said, Virginia's for lovers, not for snitches, on that front. But the reality on that, I think, is that the Democrats saw that as an always saw this as a targeted race because it was a district compared to, let's say, the district in Western Loudoun, Fauquier, that looked like it was more gettable. But the concern was that Coiner was personally popular in the district, and it was going to be difficult to beat. She had been a school board member beforehand. She had been perceived by many people, though it was not perceived the way by the Democrats in the ads, as one of the more moderate Republicans. She'd worked very hard on education issues, and that she was going to be tougher to beat. And ultimately, it was a pretty convincing victory.
Well, you mentioned Congress a little bit ago when we were talking about, how people identify as Republican and Democrats based on kind of congressional candidates. So we've got to ask, and we've had this question several times, do you think that the election results impacted Tim Kaine's vote to end the government shutdown, or just in general? What are your views about Senator Kaine really stepping up and taking a lot of heat, but stepping up and being one of the leaders to bring an end to the government shutdown last week?
And Warner didn't vote to do it, right?
Correct.
So this
yes,
was
sir.
an arrangement.
Yes.
Basically, Warner's up for election next year. He knows where the Democratic base was on that issue, which was just fight. Don't give in. Tim Kaine probably, had an argument that, that it was Virginia federal workers who were most harmed by this, and that it was important to put an end to it. And then he claimed that there were, certain provisions in this that would work to the Democrats' benefits as well, and work to, support the views and the policies of the Democrats. And basically, I thought, Kaine basically said, I'll step up and be the 60th vote, because that's all there were. And I'll defend it. And he's a pretty good defender of things. And he's not up for election, until 2030. And my guess is that he won't run again. Not because of this, because I just think that he had to be convinced to run again this time.
Yes.
And so I think he was willing to take the heat. And ultimately, I think the Democrats believe that they got enough out of this, even though they got nothing concrete, that they're going to continue to, bang on this healthcare issue for a while. It didn't appear, the base was still furious with them. But it doesn't have much of an impact on Tim Kaine's political future at all.
Yeah, very good point. All right, so talking about the future, give us your predictions, Dr. Holsworth, on midterms. What impact will the Spanberger election, the New Jersey elections? I mean, you talked about a lot of gains that Democrats have had in both special elections in this past election cycle. What is your prediction for the midterms, and what does that look like?
Far too early to predict anything, because one doesn't know what how it will go. But here's the challenge I think the Republicans have, particularly in these competitive districts. And the question is, how much are they going to be able to do in redistricting to prevent them from being in competitive districts? But I'll take a look at Virginia first. In the 8 years of the Trump administration, the Republicans have gone from 66 delegates in the House to 36. Right. And they can't bring themselves to criticize Donald Trump, who is the principal reason that they've lost 30 seats. I mean, they probably wouldn't have kept all of them, but they wouldn't have lost 30 in 8 years other than this. So my sense is that the Republicans still are in this kind of vise, and they don't know how to get out of it. And I think in the competitive districts, the Democrats have a very good chance of flipping the House right now. The question is, how many of these districts are really going to be competitive in Congress, because redistricting has just made so many things non-competitive. And so that's, I think, the real open question there. The Democrats have an uphill climb in the Senate because there are just so many red states get the same number of senators as California, New York, and the like. Spanberger says she's kind of the national model. I think the issues the Democrats had was this affordability issue. Whether or not that they can show they can deliver on that open question in my mind. Republicans are going to try to make Mondami the face of the party, but I don't know if that's going to be effective because he is the single best communicator the Democrats have. And while they may not embrace his policies, they would do well to embrace his style of campaigning. And he's just amazing in those kind of the communication skills. I would just tell one story that I loved is that he was on Jon Stewart. I don't know if anyone saw this. And Stewart asked him about how you kind of mobilize all these young people. And he was talking, he said, he said, I go to them and I talk to them and I tell them this line from a former mayor, Ed Koch, that if you are with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. He said, if you're with me on 12 out of 12, see a psychiatrist. And then he says that, some guys, I'm doing a video in Central Park, and a young guy comes running up to me and he says, 12 out of 12, baby, send me away. But Mondami had this incredible capacity so the Democratic challenge actually right now is the best communicators are ideologically outside of the quote unquote mainstream. They're Mondami, they're AOC, they're Bernie Sanders.
And very vastly different.
Abigail Spanberger, for all her skills, is not a great communicator on that front. So we'll have to see how the Democrats can do going forward, because the people that are the communicators, and I add Graham Plattner to that one as well, are not people that the establishment Democrats like at all. And if I don't know how the Democratic Party is going to come together on that. So we'll see.
Well, I'm going to finish the last question with finishing up what you finished with, which is higher education. And we had several questions talking about now that Governor-elect Spanberger will be heading up the executive here in the Commonwealth. Do you think that we will see President Rao and the VCU administration take a different approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts on the VCU campus, more in alignment with what you're talking about with what we're seeing at George Mason? Or do you see the path, you think, continuing to go in the anti-DEI direction?
A couple of things there. First, my sense of President Rao is that he goes with the flow. He's survived a long time in there, and that he will try to negotiate the politics that there. I don't see him as a particularly person with strong views who's willing to articulate them under pressure and any kind of adversarial reaction on that front. The question is the board. And I think the challenge actually in moving this board differently, you have people who are saying DEI is a monster on the board who are there until 2027, I might add. How quickly does that change? Because I think Spanberger's interest and the legislature's interest, I might add, the legislature is far more concerned than they ever have. They now believe that everybody is, they found a point in the code that says the Board of Visitors should be under the control of the General Assembly at all times. But their focus is on UVA, GMU, and VMI. They want to punish VMI for getting rid of Superintendent Wynn. VCU is sort of lower on the list right now. And so my sense is that what you'll find is that there'll be a slow replacement of Republican board members with more Democratic board members on this. And the question is, do we have leadership at the university that's actually going to articulate the historical mission of the school and be proud of it and not run away from it? And that's an issue.
And that is a wonderful way for us to end. Dr. Holsworth, thank you so much for your time today. There's never enough time for all the questions we have, but thank you for spending your time with us, and thank you to our audience for being here and providing outstanding questions. Stephen, I will turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holsworth and Dr. McDougle. That was such a great session. And again, Bob, you're so great in breaking down these elections for us. And I know you don't want to predict, but I predict that this was a very impactful session for a lot of our viewers I hope the audience will take this away and be able to share conversations with their folks as well. We are excited to have our next Lunch and Learn in January. So I want to stress that we will not have a Lunch and Learn in December. Happy holidays to all those who normally join us on a month-to-month basis, but we will have our next Lunch and Learn January 21st at 12 to discuss the state of housing policy in Virginia with one of our alumni and expert in this field, Fabrizio Fasulo, coming from Virginia Housing. Thank you again to the folks in the background who make this happen, our communications team. Thank you to Bob and Robyn for their contribution. And then, of course, thank you to our folks who get to join us during their lunch. We appreciate the time that you spend with us. Again, happy holidays. And with thanks and gratitude, we send you off. Thank you.